Our top story this half hour. There are yet more strikes in France this Wednesday as public pressure on the government continues to mount over its unpopular plans to raise the retirement age to 64. Record numbers of people took to the streets in protest yesterday, and today transport and electricity output does remain disrupted by the industrial action. Well, France already has a lower retirement age than most of its European neighbours, and the government says the reforms are essential. But the unions argue they're unfair, especially for low-skilled workers and for women. Speaking on the radio this morning, though, a government spokesperson says it is now time, possibly, for dialogue. Take a listen.
We disagree on the 64 years, but that's been going on for a while. We're not going to agree. They've organised protest strike days and we respect that. The government's door is more than open. And if the unions, who for a number of weeks have not crossed its threshold, decide once again to enter and discuss, we are ready for dialogue.
Want to talk about what is happening here in France? The analyst Jean-Christophe Gallien joins me in the studio. Good afternoon to you. Thanks for coming in. What do you make there of the comments by Olivier Véran calling for dialogue? Do you think the unions are ready to sit down and negotiate?
I'm not sure at all, and I'm not sure the government wants it the same. Both are having their run on different parts of the society. The unions are working on the street now with the public opinion on their side, and they also are working and lobbying inside the parliament and the National Assembly for the next round. At the same time, the government is writing his own agenda. They have decided to work on that proposition around that reform. Around a procedure, the legislative procedure, which is quite quick. 50 days. It will end whatever the thing goes on 26 March at the end of the day, and there will be impossibility if the reform and the project is not voted to action it by decree or by a special formula, which is called 49.3 in the French government solution. That will be able for them to work out the reform if the reform is not voted. So the two working on a special agenda, and today there is no communication, and nobody wants really that communication.
We'll talk about what's happening in Parliament in a moment, but first of all, let's look at what's happening in the streets. The unions are now talking about rolling strikes, which does suggest to me this could go on for weeks. Would you agree?
Probably, because in fact they have the support of the population right at the moment. The first thing is that they are united. It's very rare in France, and that in the labor history, the labor strikes, or whatever history, the unions are united around that project, against that project, and the population, the whole public opinion is backing them up. At the same time, when you analyze the reaction of the public opinion, they don't feel that this counter movement could be able to, at least on a partial withdrawal of the project, could happen. So it's a quite funny, a tricky situation. The unions are working it out. Probably it could work for about weeks after the government gets the go for the project at the parliament. But we don't know. We don't know really, because now we haven't blocked the country. The countries could be blocked in 1 week or 2 weeks, because if they do continue, the strike continue blocking, the refineries, the energy solution, things could be happening. Then, but for the moment, everything is quite stable in that instability.
Can you explain to us why there is so much opposition to these pension reforms here in France? Because, as I mentioned a bit earlier, if the reform passes, France will still have one of the lowest retirement ages in Europe, far lower than its neighbours. So why are French people so angry about this?
Probably two reasons. One is more cultural and historical. It's largely related to the fact that these labor rights in France have been, like in any kind of countries, been the results of fights and strong fights around these rights. So it's now the people very much related to that past, and the fact that this is rights they have been reach because of the fights around against laborers. But at the same time, we have another cultural part. It seems like in France, people between leisure and work, or leisure and times of work, having something that is more in balance for that than in other countries in Europe. At the same time, for example, in France, you get probably the people get off the work at 55 or 56 years old, which is not the case in other countries. So at the same time, they don't understand why they would have to work longer when not most, but largely parts of the labor force goes out of work at 55, 56 years old.
What do you make of the argument that it is women that will be most effective if affected if this legislation passes?
It's quite difficult because the whole text is happening, is not so much and well discussed, you know. Something is happening around every time. The parliamentary work didn't even go further than the second article of the project. And now at the Senate, we have only the work around the fact that it's going to be 64 years old, except for 62. So inside the text, nothing has been much discussed, you know. So it's becoming a very political object more than a societal or social object or economical object. So now the whole working around this project is around politics, and mainly about politics.
Jean-Christophe Gallien, unfortunately, we're out of time, but I want to thank you very much indeed for coming in to talk to us today.